Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are here in this great country of ours. Wanted to invite you all along for what is our Information Tech Friday kind of a discussion. So I wanted to start this off with the opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I've had. My name is Daryl Sirota, and I am the Director of Technology Services here at the EstesGroup. As you can probably determine from my background, we're all working from home diligently, and with that adds a number of security challenges that I think a number of the companies and folks have seen. And I wanted to just kind of open the Pandora's box, as it were, to share some of the things that I've seen, answer any questions that you might have. You can just open a dialogue so that you can kind of tap some of the knowledge that here at the EstesGroup that we've got. And so with that, a little bit more about me. So I started off back in the day answering silly WordPerfect, DBase, and Lotus questions, just to give you old timers a kick. To where I am now at the Director of Technology Services. I run our Managed Services and Managed Hosting division here at the EstesGroup. And along the way, I've picked up mostly technical knowledge, but some English as well. So I like to say that I speak geek as well as English. And as I go through and chat about things, acronyms are rife in this industry. So if I drop a term you're not familiar with, there's the little Q&A button over here in Zoom. Please feel free to use that. And if the opportunity arises as we move on, if it's just easier to unmute everybody and we can have a conversation, maybe that makes sense. It depends on how many people are actually going to show up today, but we're getting some good attendance, so I appreciate you coming along. As you ask questions, I do want to say that I do reserve the right to not answer every question for a number of reasons. Some questions we still have some proprietary secrets, as it were, here at the EstesGroup on, specifically how we do what we do and where we do it, kind of things. I don't want to give away the keys to the kingdom because knowledge is power. But I'm certainly here to share, at an agnostic level, some of the challenges that we've seen. And I think the topic of the day, talking about EternalBlue, which is this really ancient set of hacks, ancient, going back 3 years. But how it really is applicable to today and some of the technology and vulnerabilities that we're seeing today. And then, of course, some of the answers that you might, questions you might have might provoke a very long-winded answer. Heaven forbid, let's talk about this next week. Maybe bring it to the equation, and I'm happy to do that. But I just want to make sure that we don't, kind of field the ballpark as it relates around some of the security challenges that I've seen. And so with that, let me kind of launch into what this might look like. Again, kind of freeform. I appreciate you being here for day one of our Tech Fridays. So, in a year from now, when this is wildly popular and we have hundreds of attendees, and I got to mute y'all, you can say, yep, I was there for Daryl's very first one. So from security perspective, I actually started off, in the WordPerfect and DBase realm, but realizing that the documents that people are storing are vulnerable, right? It used to be that you could password protect a Word document or WordPerfect document, and that was pretty good, right? And then we started putting them on file servers, and anybody who accessed to the file server could get access to the document, maybe without even telling me. And then we ratchet it forwards through the time, and what we now have is cloud-based systems where, I can get that document anytime, anywhere. There is a spectrum of security. But one of the most valuable things that I did in my past was teach security classes. The second most valuable thing in the security realm is that I had young boys at home. For those of you that are parents of young men, they can be challenging in the security realm. And I have to tell you that my son taught me more about home PC security than any book or any class ever did. And as we go through today, I'm happy to share some of the challenges that we went through in trying to, lock down this, shall I call him an end user? I hope he's not listening here today because that would be an insult to some folks. But I was teaching a security class when 9/11 happened. It was actually a horrible day, right? If you remember, it was a day of uncertainty. Everybody went home early, and here I was teaching about digital security. Here's how you hack into a machine. Here's how you leave silly passwords. If you leave administrator out there, that's half the keys that the bad guys need to break in. And even then, some ways that machines are set up, you don't even need a name and a password. If there's an exposure or a known vulnerability, the bad guys can break in without a name and a password. So there's a number of different avenues. But when I was teaching the security class, it really taught me that security is not a one and done type scenario. You can't just patch your workstation, say, did that, let's reboot. Okay, everything works, good, and forget about it. Because patching is a way that not only does Microsoft bring us new features, take away some loved features, but they also fix vulnerabilities. So if you don't patch, then by definition, you're late in the game to keeping your systems protected. So I wanted to bring to light in today's conversation this ancient program that the NSA developed. It was called EternalBlue. If, by the way, you got our invitation for Deep Blue, my apologies. Deep Blue is the chess program. We're actually talking about EternalBlue, which is the pieces of software that the NSA developed to hack computers. Right? We all would like to think that the NSA is above board and wouldn't do that to us, but Edward Snowden taught us for a long time that we are vulnerable. We are surveilled. And here in the US, it's been found that AT&T and I think it was AOL, maybe not AOL, but not too long ago, AT&T was caught routing backbone internet traffic to a very peculiar room in, I think it was Tacoma, Washington. And what was happening is AT&T was saying, here at NSA, you can sniff all this network traffic. And really, if as soon as a packet leaves your computer, you have no control over where that packet goes. You would like to think it takes the shortest route to its destination. You would like to think that nobody's watching it along the way. You would definitely like to think that it wasn't modified in transit. But unless you take some additional steps, you have very low expectation of privacy and low expectation of not being, well, hacked. And hacked is an overly used term. So I'll use it in a number of different avenues. But bear with me as I jump up on my soapbox. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and fire them up there in the question board as I go on. Okay, so what is EternalBlue? The long and the short of it is it was a collection of tools that the NSA developed to hack Windows machines. The goal is to break into a computer without telling the owner of the computer that you're there, and then run software of your choice. And as soon as your computer is running software that you didn't choose, it's no longer your computer. Now, for those of you that are Linux aficionados, you might go, well, yeah, Windows is a hack, right? Windows is 2 million lines of code. Nobody at Microsoft really knows what it's all doing, and there's vulnerabilities found every day. So just by running Windows, you're vulnerable. And yeah, that's true. But you know what? Linux and Mac and Android and iPhones, they're also vulnerable because we've reached the state of complexity in the operating systems that we choose to run that it's just a matter of time before new ways to break into the system are found. And heck, some people are actually even suckers and they download malware and they run it thinking they're getting a good piece of software. Back in the day, there was this fun little, I don't think it was Flash program, but it was a program called Whack-A-Mole. And Whack-A-Mole, literally, if you ever went to the carnival and you played Whack-A-Mole, it was kind of this no-brainer Candy Crush kind of a game. It was known to have a Trojan in it. So if the bad guys were able to convince you, hey, there's the coolest game in town, it's called Whack-A-Mole, you got to go to this website. Maybe you have to dial up on your modem, right? Connect to the old Ethernet or something to actually get online to get the program. But if you played Whack-A-Mole, you actually were infected. And all you knew is that you were playing Whack-A-Mole. So when the bad guys are trying to break into a machine, they're trying to do it surreptitiously, invisibly. They don't want you to know, because if you knew that the bad guys were there, you might do something like reboot. And if you reboot, maybe that clears the malware out of the system. Or maybe you format C:, and that would clear the malware out of there. And the bad guys ratcheted up the what they call persistence of malware so that maybe it could survive a reboot, right? If any of us have ever had a browser toolbar appear in their Internet Explorer, or Chrome or Firefox or Edge or any of those guys, right? If you have a toolbar that shows up and, gee, I didn't realize that I was interested in printing coupons, that browser toolbar probably has the rights to see wherever you're surfing and modify the web pages that you get back and be able to interact with you. Now, a toolbar, is a very visual indicator that, quote, you've been hacked. Now, is that toolbar interested in stealing your passwords and learning your PayPal login and modifying, what you visit and how you see? Maybe, maybe not. But it's an indication that you're running untrusted software. Just going out to the web and downloading a piece of software because it looks interesting is almost a guaranteed way to get hacked. One of the Apple was their Apple Store ecosystem was a very closed ecosystem because Apple maintained controls on the apps delivered by the App Store very closely. And even though there were third-party developers in there, they had to pass muster by Apple before they could get published in the App Store. Android, not so much. Android was a more open ecosystem, and what we actually had were malware programmers writing Android apps, publishing them in the store, looked like whack-a-mole, looked like a Wi-Fi scanner, looked like a really cool app, but in the background it was malware that was stealing passwords, modifying web pages, looking at your identity, those kinds of things, all of which I consider hacks. Now, do they end up at the end of the day with you losing your password? Do they end up with your machine being compromised? Possibly. It all depends on the success of the attacker. But those types of untrusted software is something that we really need to get a handle on. And that's what EternalBlue is. So EternalBlue was, in short, leveraging a vulnerability that the NSA found in the Microsoft SMB protocol. Now, SMB, server message block, is a protocol that's been around since NT 351, like the very first server operating system. Actually, it might have been around from before that, to be honest with you. So what happened was they found that if they hurled a packet that was the right size and the right shape, it would shove a square peg into a round hole, and the round hole wouldn't know what to do, and so it would execute what they call a buffer overflow attack. Windows wasn't expecting to get a square peg in a round hole, and so it would trip and fall down. And when it fell down, it would actually, quote, execute code of the attacker's choice. That's kind of hacker speak for, you get to run my program without knowing it. So in the case of EternalBlue, with what SMB did is it was set up for Microsoft file sharing. Workstations would run SMB clients, servers would run SMB servers, and the bad guy in the middle would say, hey, I'm going to throw a square peg into that round SMB hole, and as SMB failed, it would now run code that I chose. And that code could be download a bigger Trojan. It could be blue screen the computer. It could be download a piece of malware, download a Bitmine miner into your computer and start mining Bitcoins for me because that CPU time is expensive. The whole bit mining era is fascinating to watch. But essentially what happened is your computer was now running software that the NSA chose, right? And what they would do with that software is they could then look at your machine. It was running as an administrator context. So they would be able to look at your hard drive and look at your logins and log your keystrokes, share your screen, and do basically whatever they wanted with the computer. And so it was a great piece of software if you wanted to break into a computer. In fact, there's lots of pieces of software like that available on the web. I'm not going to start sharing malware links because then you'll accuse me of trying to hack y'all. But there was a great piece of remote access software that was called Dameware Remote. Now, Dameware, D-A-M-E-W-A-R-E, was actually a legitimate company, And the idea was, well, your network admins are too busy to get up and run over to your users' desks. So they would deploy this piece of software and it would let you remotely access the machine. You could look at files and registry. And if you wanted to take over the screen, you could take over the screen. And if you wanted to turn the microphone on, you could turn the microphone on. If you wanted to turn the webcam on, you could turn the webcam on, which is kind of scary in this day and age when you think about it, right? Now, we've probably already heard people, hacking Ring doorbells and things like that. Ring's gotten a lot more secure recently. But imagine if the bad guys had access to your webcam. I don't want to share a URL with you called Shodan, or I do want to share with you, shodan.io, SHODAN.io. It's a scary website because the bad guys, well, in this case, the good guys, they're crawling the web looking for insecure webcams. So if you were foolish enough to set a webcam and expose it to the naked bleeding edge of the internet, Shodan found you. And you can too enjoy the viewing and listening pleasure of foolish people on the web. Because by default, webcams are insecure. The guys were designing webcam firmware and firmware software. They just designed it because they wanted to get the webcam out on the market for as cheap as possible with the cheapest circuitry. And hey, look, you can watch your doorbell or your front door or, the kids or, wherever you set up the webcam. The problem is if it's not secure, now not only are you watching the webcam, but maybe you've got other people watching your webcam too. So webcams don't leave admin, but boy, I'm spilling all the beans in my first 10 minutes here on the webinar, or 20 minutes. So EternalBlue is basically such a program. It broke in through the SMB message block and was found to be very effective. And the NSA used this for years. As a matter of fact, let me grab a note here. It's not that I'm looking away from you, but looking at my notes. The NSA designed the EternalBlue, and they were using it internally for several years, and it was leaked. That is, the bad guys got a hold of it. Now, we don't necessarily know how, and I don't think we'll ever know how the bad guys got it, because why would the NSA go, well, we picked up a thumb drive in the parking lot and we plugged it in our computer and it didn't look like it did anything, but boy, right? Don't plug unknown thumb drives into your computer. You're asking to get hacked. It's how Stuxnet moved into the nuclear reactors overseas by thumb drive. Anyway, so it was leaked in April of 2017. So the bad guys jumped up for joy and they said, we now have this awesome set of tools, one of which is EternalBlue, to be able to break into computers. And so all we had to do was find a computer that was running this SMB protocol, throw a square peg into a round hole, and now your computer is the bad guy's computer. And they own it. Now, if they were good, you never knew. Your computer didn't run too much slower, pop-ups didn't appear, no ransomware notices, no nothing from a visually obvious interaction on your computer told you that you were hacked. But nonetheless, here it is, and you've been hacked. So then what happened is, after April 2017, it was actually April 14th in 2017, the bad guys got EternalBlue, and they immediately started coding bad stuff around it. Hey, the NSA gave us this toolkit. What we're going to do is we're going to use it to deploy ransomware, because ransomware is money, right? It's all fun, fun to watch your computer screen and see your passwords and get your files and all that stuff. But ransomware, still a big money maker. Back in the day, the FBI wouldn't investigate any ransomware or hack unless you could prove $2,000 or more of financial loss. So back in 2017, ransomware, wanting to stay under the window of the FBI, they would only ransom you for $19.95. And that way you couldn't go to the FBI. And even if you did go to the FBI, for those small figures, they would go, we don't care, you're not a big enough fish. So in the early days of ransomware, we had low price tags. Now the ransomers have gotten bold. And now ransoms are in the tens of thousands of dollars, or if you're a particularly big government, hospital, or organization, can go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So ransomware is still a huge issue. But apparently the bad guys don't care if the FBI investigates. If they're hiding well enough, they're not going to get caught. And it's rare that a ransomware is actually caught. Okay, so April 14th, the bad guys get EternalBlue from the NSA. By May 12th, less than 30 days later, a particularly nasty bug called Wannacry was released to the world. Wannacry was, well, it made you want to cry because it was ransomware. It used EternalBlue as the delivery exploit. So as soon as Wannacry got a foothold inside a corporate network, it would jump from machine to machine to machine and ransom it. And when it ransomed, I don't know if any of you have been ransomed, I hope not, but if you have, you're in the right place to get a little more paranoid and a little more educated about it. Ransomware, the first thing it does, well, ransomware 1.0, let's start appropriate. This ransom, what it would do is it would go out to the internet, it would get a key, an encryption key, store it on the ransomer's server. Well, it wasn't their server, it was some sucker they hacked a long time ago. But it would store the key on the server because you need the key to be able to unlock things. And then it would use that key to lock up all the files on your hard drive, and then it would produce a pop-up that says, ha ha ha, you've been ransomed, you know, pay this much in Bitcoin. You got 3 days to pay, you know, $500 in Bitcoin. And then if you wait 3 days, then the ransom's going to go to that $19.95 in Bitcoin. And after 7 days, we're just going to throw the key away. So don't bother trying to pay us after 7 days because you know, creating a sense of urgency. And Wannacry was a big bad deal. Now, when the NSA lost control of EternalBlue, at that point, now this is years later, they've had EternalBlue for years. They finally went to Microsoft and went, hey, Microsoft, you got a bug. It's called a buffer overflow attack in the SMB 1.0 protocol. And we're now telling you all about this bug so that you can fix your round hole so that it doesn't accept the square peg. So what happened then is Microsoft, learning of this, actually developed a patch. And believe it or not, and it's interesting, they developed the patch before the bad guys got the leak. So Microsoft released a patch in March of 2017 that would nullify EternalBlue. And in so nullifying it, then if you were, you know, if you patched your machine in March, well, after the March release came out, and then when it was leaked in April and Wannacry came out in May, if you had patched your machine, you were immune to Wannacry or EternalBlue, really, the underpinning, which has been great, except for one problem. Most people aren't aggressive in their patching. So what happened is Wannacry, even though it came out 2 months, March, April, May, you consider by the end of March, you should have patched your machines. All of April, the NSA didn't tell anybody it was leaked, right? The bad guys, you know, announced the availability of EternalBlue to the dark web. And by May 12th, had you patched your machine, you wouldn't have been vulnerable, but people didn't patch, so they got hit. So Wannacry was a big exploit. Okay, most users hadn't installed the patch. And in fact, as we fast forward, after Wannacry broke out, you would think everybody went, oh my gosh, SMB 1.0, unpatched, bad news, patch your machines. Oh no, didn't work well. There was a next malware called NotPetya, N-E-T or NetPetya, P-E-T-Y-A. I think it's Russian, maybe? Sounds like Russian kind of a name. It came out in June of 2017, exploiting the same exact vulnerability. And it also went through and ransomed a whole bunch of people, okay? So when NotPetya came out, you would think after that, people will go, oh my gosh, it's a vulnerability, we should patch against it. People fell asleep. I don't know what's wrong with the internet community because they don't think patching is important. In fact, by December of 2018, millions, not hundreds, but millions of machines were still found vulnerable. And in order to do their due diligence in raising the bar, an awesome website, or a tool set called Metasploit, M-E-T-A-S-P-L-O-I-T. Exploit, by the way, is short for exploit. So the bad guys, they talk about exploits, you know, when they're drinking their natty bows down in the streets, hacking machines and whatnot. So Metasploit actually is a framework for exploiting machines. If you have a vulnerability, like EternalBlue's vulnerability, you can use a tool called Metasploit, and it's a user-friendly, web-driven tool that you can download and install, and you too can hack your own machines. I use Metasploit in my security classes to demonstrate exploits. This is how we get a command prompt on your machine that you don't know about. This is how we get your machine to turn on the webcam and turn on the microphone that you don't know about. So Metasploit developed a module that leveraged EternalBlue's vulnerability so that you could prove, hey, guess what? You're vulnerable. So, but as of December 2018, this now is 18 months after, 19 months after EternalBlue hit, Metasploit came out, and we still find millions of machines vulnerable. At this point, EternalBlue has cost companies and industries billions of dollars. 65 countries have fallen to EternalBlue's vulnerability and been ransomed or hacked in some fashion. And I say this next line of data with no pride whatsoever. I'm actually a Baltimorean by nature. I moved out to Colorado a little over 10 years ago. Baltimore is my hometown. Baltimore City in May of 2019 fell victim to ransomware. You'll never guess what they used to ransom Baltimore City. EternalBlue. Okay, so at this point now, May of 2019, it's been 2 years, more than 2 years after Microsoft said, patch your computers, guys, and Baltimore City didn't patch. Now, one might argue, whose fault is that? And you could look at that, well, the bad guys are still breaking into computers. It was the bad guys, they shouldn't have been doing it. One might argue it's Baltimore City's fault because they hadn't patched their machines. They've had 2 years to patch their boxes and they didn't do it. So finally, you might realize, you might be aware that this new operating system called Windows 10 came out. Windows 10 still runs the old SMB protocol. Well, ran the old SMB protocol. Why? Because if they turned it off and tried to entice you to run Windows 10, you couldn't go talk to your old file servers, backwards compatibility. So the initial versions of Windows 10 actually included SMB 1.0, and they were vulnerable to EternalBlue. Now they did come with their firewall turned on, thank you, but most corporate companies still turn the Windows firewall off, and I don't know why. Probably because they want their little stuff to run without impediment of this nasty firewall. But if you turn your firewall off and you're running SMB 1.0 and you're not patched, guess what? You're vulnerable. So Windows 10 deployed with SMB 1.0 vulnerable, although it was mitigated by the firewall, although most IT firms turn the firewall off. So it wasn't until Windows 10, I think it was the 1809 release of Windows 10 where they disabled SMB 1.0 for you. A bunch of people went, oh my gosh, I can't talk to my old file server anymore. Why can't I do that? Well, because Microsoft turned off SMB. Thankfully, they broke a lot of old file servers. By the way, if you run old NAS devices, Buffalo, Linksys, D-Link, NAS devices, they use SMB 1.0. as well. Now, they weren't vulnerable to the attack because they didn't run a Windows operating system. It was a Windows-specific hack. But if you wanted to talk to your old Buffalo drive, you turn on SMB 1.0, and that made you vulnerable. And Windows 10, to this day, while it's turned off, you can still turn it on and become vulnerable to EternalBlue. So, what's my point in all of this? First off, new vulnerabilities are found all the time. When the vendors learn about them, then they usually issue a patch or mitigation or an advice to how to prevent this from losing your server or your workstation. And if the community at large listens to the advice and applies the patch or does the mitigation, then life moves on as usual. But companies get lazy. They don't deploy the patch. They say, I don't have time to install every patch that comes out. Gosh, Microsoft releases updates once a month. Thankfully, it's only once a month now, right? That could mean that you were vulnerable for the time up until they figured out the exploit, release the patch, and you install the patch. So aggressive patch management to high-risk servers is something that I strongly recommend. If you have a server that's sitting on the naked bleeding edge of the internet and you don't patch it aggressively, like the day after Microsoft goes, patch your servers, you're probably hacked. And if it's a good hack, you won't know. And if it's a great hack, you won't know for 6 months. And in 6 months, after all of your backups have been infected with the hack, then the ransomware or the malware explodes, and the bad guys go, well, pay us $10,000 to get your server back. Oh, by the way, we stole all your confidential data while we were locking it up. So, in ransomware 2.0, now the bad guys, they've infected your network. The average infection sits undetected. I think it's 145 days. Might be 161. My memory is going a little gray on me, but months before they detonate the malware. So, and that's enough time to infect all your backups, right? So a lot of times what I see customers doing is the ransomware explodes, they reach for their backups, they restore their backups. Now, the backups don't have the exploded ransomware, so they think they're safe. So they restore all of their backup documents. Now, meanwhile, the ransomware is still sitting there unexploded. Maybe the bad guys have infected not just file server A, but file server B. Maybe they've infected it with not just EternalBlue, but the next piece of malware. So when a machine is infected, it's not just what exploded on you, but what's lying unexploded. That's really the risk, because the bad guys don't want to lose foothold of your network. Most people who get ransomed once and pay the ransom get ransomed again because they didn't learn their lesson. I actually had a client. They weren't a managed services client. They were a break-fix client. And they got ransomed once. It was the president of the company. They were surfing the web thinking what they could do. And the president has lots of permissions to lots of files across the network. Got themselves ransomed, locked up a few 100 gigs of data. We recovered the data, formatted the president's hard drive, but the bad guys had figured out that, hey, we got a sucker. Ransomed themselves again and again and again. They got ransomed 4 times before they finally closed the hole, put the filtering in place, told the president, you can't have local admin. You can't have rights to all file shares across the network, without proper mitigation. And the ransoming stopped, fortunately. And that was before the days of ransomware 2.0. So how do we protect against something like this? Well, because we run a Windows operating system or a Mac or a Linux, they're all vulnerable operating systems. So don't ever let anybody tell you, well, I use Mac because it's more secure. They're just hackable in different ways. EternalBlue only attacks Windows machines. And the reason I'm talking about Windows machines is that's because what most corporations run. And I know I have a coworker here, and she's laughing because she goes, no, I run Mac. We're good. I'm an iShop. And don't let that fool you into a false sense of complacency, because they're as vulnerable because they have this thing called a user. And users will do the stupidest things, like surf the internet and read their email and click on links and say, yes, I want my MTB. And it's that type of loose-lipped behavior that will get you hacked, because the bad guys are out there. They're just waiting for time, opportunity, and tools to be able to successfully hack your system. So we prevent it by doing a couple of things. And I can go across some of the due diligences here and the stuff that you've heard all along. We patch our machines. We turn on the firewall. We don't let people be local administrators. We make sure antivirus is current. And I laugh because antivirus is almost by definition a day late and a dollar short. Antivirus is a piece of software that is written to look at the programs that are running in your computer or about to run and make a split-second determination. Is this a good program or a bad program? And if it's a bad program, don't let it run. Quarantine it. Alert the press. You've got a piece of malware. However, malware designers now have toolkits. That is, just like we buy a toolkit to program software, the bad guys have toolkits to program malware. So I don't have to know about EternalBlue. I don't have to know about Metasploit. I don't have to know about square pegs and round holes. I just go buy a toolkit, and the toolkit says, well, try these 5 ways to infect a machine, and if one of them works, you're in. Worse yet, the malware toolkits, all they do is change the malware by 1 byte or 2 bytes, which changes the signature of the program. And now your antivirus software, which is looking for signatures, that's primarily how they work. They go, oh, this piece of software doesn't have a known bad signature, therefore it must be okay. And custom malware, custom design malware, you might even call it custom designer malware, is specifically written for a company. This is not unusual nowadays. If a bad guy wants to infect you and your company, they will go either get a malware design toolkit, or better yet, they'll just hire somebody. Hey dude, I need you to write a piece of malware that's going to infect company X. This malware won't be seen anywhere else in the world. We're only going to drop it in front of company X. We're only going to try and put it on their web server, or we're only going to try and infect their RDP servers. We're only going to put it on a thumb drive outside their front door, and that malware is one of a kind. It still does the same EternalBlue exploit. It still does the same underlying vulnerabilities, hoping that you haven't patched your machines, hoping that all of your little firewalls in your network are all turned off so that it can spread laterally throughout your network. But custom design malware is a thing today. You can go on the dark web and hire yourself a malware programmer, get yourself a piece of malware, and Symantec, McAfee, Bitdefender, none of them will find it. Kind of scary. So antivirus, day late, dollar short. But you got to run it, because otherwise you're vulnerable to 99% of the other stupid stuff that does match the signature. And creating what I call a defense in depth strategy, which is don't just depend on one piece of software or one piece of hardware to protect you. The bad guys are trying to get around it. And let me bring in case in point. For those of you on the call that have listened to your security bulletins, did you know that Microsoft released their latest round of patches for July? Tuesday, they came along and released July patches, right? You'll see it in your Windows update as 7.17, security, roll-up, cumulative patch. And included in those set of patches is a fix for a vulnerability. Dig this, it blows me away. It's a vulnerability in the Microsoft DNS server service. The vulnerability is such that they shove a square peg into a round hole of a DNS server and they own the machine, okay? They gain system rights, root privileges, admin, whatever you want to call it, to that DNS server, where they can do whatever they want, right? Install Trojans, ransom you, turn it off, blue screen it, create all sorts of havoc. Now, who runs Microsoft DNS servers? Anybody who has Active Directory. So I don't know if you know of anybody that runs Active Directory. We do, in a couple of places. We do run Active Directory inside our corporate network. We run Active Directory inside our hosted network. We touch Active Directory for all of our clients, because 99% of all our clients run Active Directory, because that's the, Microsoft won the vendor war. Novell didn't, Microsoft did. So, okay, fine. We all run DNS servers. But dig this, the vulnerability has been there for 17 years. Think about that, right? The NSA exploit, EternalBlue, was around for many years, and the NSA knew about it, and they were exploiting it for a long time. They were breaking into supposedly the bad guys and owning their machines. And once it was leaked out onto the web, then Microsoft released a patch. It's still not been deployed widely, but Microsoft is tightening the screws on Windows 10 and Server 19 so that EternalBlue doesn't work anymore. But here's a new vulnerability in the DNS server. It's been out there for 17 years. Let's see, have you been running DNS for more than a little while? Now it is all of our DNS servers, Microsoft DNS servers, are suspect. Is it really my server? Is there a Trojan running inside of it? How long have the bad guys known about this and exploited the server, and now it's running untrusted code of the attacker's choice, and it's running under the desktop, so I don't know. Well, I don't know. So the answer is we might have well over X% of the world's DNS servers compromised. What does that mean for security? Personally, it makes me freak out. Okay, it makes me think, oh my goodness, how could Microsoft have been so stupid to create such a vulnerability and not know about it? Why was it only discovered July of 2020? And how is it that Microsoft then makes everybody aware of this? Oh, install your patches. Great. How many folks get that? Install your patches. Well, I'll do it, tomorrow when I have time. Oh, those Windows updates, gosh, they take so long and they take the server down for an hour. I can't afford to be down for an hour. So I'm not going to install the patches until this weekend. Now that the vulnerability has been announced, there have been exploits written for it. Now, at this time, nobody knows if your Microsoft DNS server is actually compromised. We haven't figured that out yet, but it's just a matter of time. Whether it's going to be a Wannacry or a NotPetya or a pick the name that you want to choose for next week hack, it's going to be out there. And so what we now have is a powder keg of DNS servers that are the backbone of corporate enterprises. Okay, so it was somewhat unusual in that Microsoft, when they announced this, there's this thing called the CVS database, or Common Vulnerability Score, CVS. And there's if you just search CVS, it's not the pharmacy, you search CVS and you will find this thing scored a 10 out of 10. That is the worst, highest. This thing's going to cause a whole lot of problems. Very few very few vulnerabilities rank higher than a 9.5. This guy ranked at 10. It is bad news. So what do? So Microsoft says, patch your servers, turn on a firewall. Don't let the bad guys at your DNS server. So I'd ask the question, well, what do you mean don't let the bad guys at our server? Of course we're not going to let the bad guys at the server, right? Where are the bad guys? Well, the bad guys are out on the internet. We know that. But maybe the bad guys are not just out on the internet, but they're on your Wi-Fi, right? Wi-Fi. If I mention that, everybody goes, well, I run WPA2. I'm secure because it's encrypted, is what I have to say to that. Wi-Fi is not secure because if all you're doing is protecting your Wi-Fi with a name and a password, then any bad guy in the parking lot can break in on your Wi-Fi with enough names and passwords, they'll break it. And in fact, WPA2, about a year and a half ago, there was a version of WPA2 which was cryptographically flawed. It meant that the bad guy just had to sniff about 5 gigs of your Wi-Fi data and he's got your password. And you go, well, my Wi-Fi is only in the warehouse. It's only, in the corporate office. We don't put Wi-Fi access points in the guest rooms or down in the cafeteria. And I would say to you, baloney, go out on the web and search for this thing called a cantenna. Cantenna is Pringles can with the right piece of hardware inside of it. It is a high gain directional Wi-Fi antenna. So you might think you have trouble getting Wi-Fi across your house. The bad guys can sit a mile away down the street, and as long as they focus their cantenna on your little Linksys, they can sniff your Linksys traffic. If they can sniff 5 gigs of your unpatched Linksys home router, because who patches their home routers? Nobody. Then you're broken into. Your Wi-Fi is not secure. Just because it's encrypted doesn't mean the bad guys can't get the keys. So the bad guys might be in the parking lot. They might be a mile away. Heck, if you spend $50 on a cantenna, they might be 2 or 3 miles away if they've got line of sight to your access point or close to your access point. So a lot of people go, well, Wi-Fi doesn't go beyond my house because I've got all this interference in my house. Trust me, the bad guys have fixed that problem. I just wish they would sell us cantennas so we could fix our home Wi-Fi problems and not just turn up the volume on our Wi-Fi, which is what everybody does. So we need to be able to make sure that the bad guys aren't in our network. And how do I keep the bad guys out of our network? Well, usually the bad guys are piggybacking on your users. They're piggybacking because your users will go, yes, I want an extension in my browser. Yes, I want to download a piece of software that lets me do my budgeting. Yes, I want to download coupon printers and I want to save money. Now, I don't think Honey is a bad extension. In fact, I use Honey because I trust it. Should I trust it? Well, I don't know. It's one of those things. Honey right now it's a coupon printer, coupon money saver browser toolbar that you can use and actually saves you money if you use it. But is it to be trusted? Question mark. Is it inside your network? How many users do you have on a laptop that go home or go to Starbucks or go to an unsecured network that doesn't have the filtering provided by the corporate firewall and get themselves hacked and then waltz in right past the corporate firewall and plug into the Ethernet or plug into the corporate Wi-Fi and spread their love, aka malware, all over the place? I've seen this for years and years, guys. Okay, schools. I would support a number of schools and universities, and what would happen is they would allow the students to connect to the Wi-Fi. Right, it's the generous thing to do. Every September, when school would come back in session, some student would walk in with malware on their machine, and they'd plug into the network, again, Wi-Fi or plug-in, I don't care, and they'd spread their love to the network. And then every September 10th, we'd be in there fighting the ransomware and restoring files and figuring out what got deleted, and what a pain in the butt. So how do we prevent against some of that? When we talk about defense in depth, we talk about putting up the rules or the firewalls, not just on the outside of your network, the perimeter, but on the inside. We separate your devices. So all of your servers, they're on the other side of the network behind a firewall. Now, most people go, well, why am I going to have a firewall inside my network? It's just my users. Every university does this, by the way. The universities figured out long ago because they used to get hacked regularly. Not hacked by the bad guys, but hacked accidentally because some unsuspecting user waltzed past the firewall and dropped their machine on behind the network. So universities segment their networks. There's a server subnet, and there's a firewall between the servers and all the workstations. And they segment the Wi-Fi from the wired, and they segment the students from the staff, and they segment the financial people from the rest of the staff, and they separate this president from everybody else because they're particularly vulnerable, especially to phishing attacks. And so by segmenting your network, you create a more secure set of barriers that if the bad guys were to break in on one segment, that doesn't mean they own the network. And that's why I come back to the fact that I can't believe people turn off their Windows firewall, because a Windows firewall protects you, your machine, from the bad guys. Who are the bad guys? Everybody. Whether they're intentionally a bad guy or accidentally a bad guy, or they're not yet a bad guy, they're all bad guys. So we have to turn on our firewalls, we have to patch, we have to run an antivirus, and we have to stop treating everybody as a trusted individual, because it's getting people ransomed, right? If you've been ransomed, you might not know how it came in unless you hired a forensic person or an IT geek to say, how did this thing break in? You might not even know. What was the attack vector? Because just getting rid of the ransom doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't close the attack vector. And bad guys are just going to break in again. They're going to send the same phishing attack to the unsuspecting AP clerk who's going to open it and get infected. They're going to, you got to change the behavior. So unfortunately, that's where I kind of I'm going to jump off my soapbox and go, it's not a lost cause, but we have to change the venue. I used to live in a trusted world. For example, back in Maryland, I lived in a great neighborhood. Well, I thought it was great because I knew all my neighbors. My dog sat on the front porch, so if any stranger walked by, I'd know because my dog would bark. Although he'd bark at squirrels too, which was a false positive. And I left my doors unlocked. I left the keys to my car in the ignition. It was in my garage, but my garage wasn't locked. And the reality is, had somebody wanted to, they could have walked up to my house, thrown a stake at my dog, shut the dog up, opened my garage door, and drove away with my car. Nobody did. It was never even a thought in my mind that I lived in such a vulnerable neighborhood that this would happen. So how many of us are living the same way digitally? I trust everybody. I save my passwords to Chrome and I synchronize them to Google because I trust Google. I don't know about you, but I don't trust a whole lot of people, not Google. I don't trust Microsoft either. I'm a little more paranoid. Guess what? Nowadays, I take the keys out of my car. I lock my garage door. I lock my keys in my house, and I have a car alarm. So if you're going to try and steal my car, I've now got 5 barriers, 5 firewalls, if you will, before you can drive away in my car. Now, at the end of the day, is my car really valuable? We have this thing called car insurance, which at the end of the day does, absolve me of financial responsibility. If you steal my car, I call the police, I file an insurance claim, and my car insurance covers the loss of the vehicle. How many of us have cyber insurance? Where if you get hacked and your backups fail and you didn't patch and the firewall was down and the user brought it in, and you got hacked, have cyber insurance to cover the financial loss that you just incurred because you were down. Baltimore City didn't pay the ransom. Ransomers, I think they wanted 40 or 50 grand for the key to unlock Baltimore City's files. Baltimore City said, no way, we're not paying the ransom. By the way, I applaud that because you shouldn't pay the ransom. It just encourages the behavior. On the other hand, I think they've spent $2 million recovering. And I don't know if you ever lived in Baltimore, but I hope you didn't have to pay a parking ticket or a water bill for the 2 months it took them to recover. They were down. They lost face. Now, how many companies can shoulder the loss of 2 months of income on their website or from their customers? I'm sorry, we can't. We would love to bill you, customer, but our systems are down, so don't bother paying us. They actually had people in Baltimore City lining up to pay parking tickets manually and writing handwritten receipts for the bills because their systems were down. Don't let that be you, right? Can we absolutely prevent it? No, it's a game of give and take. The bad guys are going to find new ways to break in, whether it's EternalBlue or the July 2020 DNS hack, or it's enticing you to download, or heaven forbid you pick up a cool looking USB drive and plug it into your computer. Guess what? USB drives, they're cheap. If you want a USB drive, don't pick up a stray one and plug it in because it might be malware. Now, if you are the kind of person that likes to live on the edge and there's nothing on the machine that you care about and your machine is not connected to any other machine and you know about security and you're watching all of the ins and outs and ports and cables and stuff, yeah, go ahead and plug it in, see what it does. That's what the forensics guys do. They pick up a piece of malware and they put it in a sandbox and they detonate it and they see what it does and they learn how it communicates. Where are the command and control centers? How is it going to be nullified? What's the way to circumvent it? And there's lots of other great stories that I can tell you about security next week when we look at how can we keep this thing running securely, but still keep it running. Okay, it's 12:25 Mountain Standard Time, and I've been launching for a while, and I've got no questions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to turn on the mics because we don't have a whole lot of people, so it shouldn't be a significant loss. And so I think, Brad, you're sitting out there helping me co-host this thing. Brad, are you still there?
Sure am.
Awesome. Hey, would it be all right if we, if interested, what we're going to do is we're going to allow you guys to unmute yourself. So if you have a question or a comment, or you want to slam me for something I said, I'm brave. Go ahead. Let's open them up and let's see what you guys have to say, and ladies. And if you don't want to talk,
I'll give everyone a minute to think of one here, and I'll launch one myself. So, Daryl, I work in kind of the quasi-IT world where I end up finding the need to transfer files that contain quite often program logic, C# or even maybe some SQL or something like that. What do you find to be the best way of communicating that to other people without the firewalls and such interpreting that as malicious code? What's the nicest, most reasonable way to get that information communicated?
So depending on the recipient and their level of paranoia or security, really the same thing. One could take your code and lock it up in a zip file. And if you zip the file, then you just email the zip file as an attachment. And most people will allow zip files to be emailed. So that's one way you can lock up the code. A better way, and by the way, the bad guys do this too, is you zip up the code with a password. Zip files with a password is what they call asymmetric encryption, meaning you use a password to lock up the file, you use the same password to unlock the file. It's easy to do, computationally trivial. But what it does is it locks the file up such that a malware scanner or an executable scanner, or I don't like to send EXEs, is obscured, so it just looks like an encrypted zip file. Now, some folks have gotten wise to this and they don't allow encrypted zip files to be attached to their email. So you might find that it doesn't make it to the recipient, right? So therefore, you might have to get a little bit more sneaky, and you might have to post that file on a website that the user is allowed to surf. So for example, we're an Office 365 shop, and one of the things that 365 does wonderfully is this tool called OneDrive. And I can put that file in a OneDrive location, whether I encrypt the file or not. It's up to you, right? It's encrypted on Microsoft servers. It's encrypted in transit because it's HTTPS, but it might not be encrypted as you see the file. And then I give the recipient a link to come get the file. That recipient link can be anonymous. It can be password protected. It can expire after a period of time. It can be authenticated. And it can be refused to be forwarded to anybody else. So I can apply layers of security to that file to prevent anybody else from getting at the file other than my intended recipient. So whether you can send the file by email or zip or encrypted zip, or you've got to post it on a website like OneDrive or share a file, or heck, if you own a web server, you can put it out there on your own web server, or you can put it out there on box.com or dropbox.com. I don't care. You know, there's a lot of ways to do it. It's the question of, you know, how secure do you need the file to be, and who is it, you know, is it okay if it leaks out to somebody else? But yeah, there's lots of ways to solve that problem. OneDrive is probably my recommended because I know we've got it.
Sure. Cool.
And I can support it. All righty. So any other questions? Go ahead and raise your hand. Give a shout out. I think you can unmute yourself if I'm right. And if you got something to say, great. If you don't, that's okay. Guess what? I'm going to be here next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. I'm not sure what the topic is going to be. We're welcome to take suggestions. I'd like to keep it on the security bent only because it's something I can talk ad nauseum about. And guess what? People still aren't going to listen. Hopefully you guys, now that you've attended, you'll think about this a little bit more clearly. You'll be a little more paranoid, a little more secure. And with that, I appreciate all your time. If you want to get in touch with me, that's a great question. Brad, do we have like an evaluation link, or what's the net result of our webinar here?
You know, I don't think we had an evaluation link. What we'll do, we'll send out an email follow-up to the attendees and solicit any feedback that way.
Perfect. You got any suggestions? I'm happy to hear them. Meanwhile, thanks for coming along, hanging out. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. Don't forget to patch your machines this weekend, okay? Thanks. Bye.